at this location about 175 years ago. A small party from Concord, Massachusetts arrived to attempt a new way of life, removed from the world and its pursuit of profit and its subjugation of humanity and all forms of life. There were about 5 children and 4 adults, and some people were already here and others joined once the whole thing got started. And certainly one of the primary features was the amazing vista of the west and north. They called the place Fruitlands because there was an orchard here at the time, and their hope was to, among other things, start an orchard. Among the party were people who had met up with the Transcendentalists in Concord, the Alcotts, and a fellow named Charles Lane who had come from England in the hope of attempting to put some of the Transcendentalist ideas into practice. Mr. Lane provided much of the money to purchase the property. Today we can see how it was a pretty interesting property, far from Concord, maybe about 15-20 miles, and it's on a westerly slope which goes all the way down to the Nashua River, and it's quite a steep slope. At the time there was a Shaker community nearby and some neighbors, but otherwise fairly remote. Louisa May Alcott was 11 years old at the time, and she and her sisters were part of this experiment. And sometime in the 1870s, she wrote down her remembrance of this event. And today we and others before us have kept this park or this location to celebrate their experiment. You might say the first American hippies. Mrs. Alcott writes that upon arrival, her mother was a little disappointed because the farmhouse, where they intended to live, was quite far from the road. You see it now. It's a small red, or I should say rather ample red farmhouse. And Louisa May, writing in the 1870s, said, "My mother complained that the access wasn't very good." Something people might notice today. Her mother wasn't a transcendentalist, and part of the story, as Louisa May remembers it, is some disagreements between her mother and Charles Lane, the transcendentalist, and, well, also Louisa May's father. Louisa May describes her father as being a very serene and wise and charming individual, very thoughtful and spiritual, and above all passionately interested in forming this new community. So her father was apparently not so much a quarreler, but a person with his head in the clouds, you might say. Today the site has been gone through many improvements, and many different people have gathered their resources to protect the property and to make it a site worth visiting. So there are now, in addition to the Fruitlands farmhouse itself, several buildings that are museums with different functions. And the town that we're in here is Harvard, Massachusetts, far away from the university, but Cambridge, of course, is the town where Harvard University is, and Harvard, town of Harvard, is the same name, but not named from the same source. Alcott says that the uh, the party that came here intended to live according to high principles. They were going to uh, free live free of subjugation, and they intended to live in a way that permitted human freedom or pursued human freedom. So the people who were going to be a part of this community would, everybody would do what they passionately wished to do. So if you wanted to write poetry, you would write poetry, or if you wanted to study plants and botany in the forests, you could do that. Or if you wanted to help raise and educate the children, like Louisa May Alcott's mother, then you could do that. And they were going to farm, so that was the one sort of required activity, was preparing the garden and planting the orchard. So a classic example of a utopian society, or an effort at a utopian society. They pooled their money together, bought some of the things they needed together, and put everything in a horse-drawn cart and walked the whole way out here. They were going to eat a vegetarian diet and practice philosophical conversations. Louisa May Alcott's father was known in Concord as the philosopher, and sometimes had the nickname Plato. So, influenced by Plato's dialogues, Alcott really hoped to practice some philosophy here out in the woods or in the countryside, far from Concord and Boston. They sold everything they had, said Louisa May Alcott, in order to make the necessary purchases. And as I mentioned, very soon some problems arose. Louisa May Alcott's mother liked to knit at night, and the two male leaders had decided that, well, they were going to live free of subjugation of any kind of life, including animal life. So whale oil wouldn't be permitted. That was the main way of lighting your home in the 19th century and 18th century. So at that point they had no way of having lighting after dark, and so the mother was a little upset about that. And as they practiced farming, and they weren't going to use any kind of farm labor, or I should say animal labor, and that became troublesome because there was a lot of hard work to do, and it was quite common to use some kind of ox or cow or horse to pull your plow through the rocky soil. Right now a train is coming through, which is adjacent to the property. It looks like a commercial or industrial train, not the commuter rail that passes north and west of here. So at one point they got some help from one of their farming friends who offered to bring his cow and ox with him and help them do some of the plowing. So they broke down a little bit there, but according to Louisa May Alcott, they were a little upset that one of the animals was in fact a cow and not an ox, because the cow wasn't really a suitable animal to pull a plow. The house which I'm walking around is today much preserved and improved, probably from the time when they arrived. It would have been a dilapidated farmhouse. See the one main body of the house here, and then an adjacent additional house, like many of the New England houses here. Much dilapidated, so there's a lot of work to do. With Louisa May Alcott's mother is the one to take care of much of the kitchen activities, which she enjoyed doing. That was her passion, so she didn't mind doing that. This is where Louisa May, as an 11-year-old, would have run around in the woods with her sisters, playing games about the fairies, and certainly influenced by their former teacher, Henry Thoreau. And surely Henry Thoreau would have made the effort to come out here from the top of the hill. You can see Mount Wachusett, which is to the northwest and maybe about 10 miles away, and then you can see Mount Monadnock, which is across the New Hampshire border. Those are two locations that Thoreau and the Transcendentalists generally would have hiked to, walked to, or found transportation and walked up. Today they have a vineyard here, and I wonder if this is the fox grape, which is a wild grape, but in the 1850s a Concord citizen domesticated the fox grape, and that fox grape is now for a certain kind of wine, and of course it's also used for juice. According to Louisa May Alcott, during the summer of 1843, many people heard about this place because Transcendentalism was all the rage in the 1840s, and so all kinds of people came by, and it sounds like a very description of beatniks and hippies and kinds of interesting intellectuals and eccentrics, and they all dug the principle. Do what your spirit moves you to do. So Louisa May says one guy was, climbing trees and, was trying to speak poetically, and some of the characters were kind of peculiar in her eyes. Her father and his friend from England, Charles Lane, were abolitionists, and so they would want to go to the conferences at that time to celebrate abolition or to explore and discuss abolition, the prohibition of plantation slavery, and that would have been likely in Worcester, a big city to our south. And so as the summer matured and there was time to go away for the conferences, it seemed to Louisa May that her male leaders were no longer so concerned about their farming anymore. They forgot their farming tasks and they took for granted the important domestic tasks that fill a human life. And so, in her eyes, one of the reasons for the failure was that the men couldn't put their idealist farming into practice. They missed out on doing some of the farm work, and so the crops began to wither and fail by the time they got to September. And she remembers some kind, maybe a hurricane in September coming overhead, and her mother gathered her girls together and a few of the people who were still around, because the men were at some kind of abolition conference, and she gathered what harvest they had, but there was very little left. And then by November, the arguments became bitter, and Charles Lane no longer got along with her father, Amos Bronson Alcott. And so the whole band broke up, and sadly Louise May's family had nowhere to go. And Charles Lane said, well, you can stay here, however don't cut any more firewood, because I'm going to have to sell the property to get my money back. And he wanted to live with the Shakers with his boy. And Louisa May describes her father at wit's end, completely in despair. Nobody cares, nobody trusts him anymore. He's offended his friends and neighbors, says Louisa May Alcott, and so he holds himself up in his room and refuses to eat for a few weeks. And she and the girls and her mother sit and wait for him to come out of his room. So by December he does, and by that point her mother has got a plan to pull them out. Some friends are going to help, some family is going to support them, and she's found a place where they can stay. So sadly the Fruitlands tale ends within about 7 months, and it's ironic in a way that we celebrate Fruitlands for the fact of its failure, but its failure is kind of a powerful lesson in utopian living. Today, Fruitlands is stewarded by a nonprofit, the Trustees of Reservations, and they maintain this unique property with its several museums and several buildings and many fields and trails. One of the trails heads down to the Oxbow Wildlife Refuge, or comes close to it, which is or includes the Nashua River. I like to see this river. It's apparently an old river because it has many bends in it, like rivers in other parts of the world. Today at Fruitlands there's a graduation. Looks like a junior high school is having a graduation ceremony, and the pavilion here looks out across the incredible view of the mountains and the western horizon. People regularly come here to be married, and there are summer concerts. 2025 summer concert series. So the Concord Band, which I assume is from Concord, Mass, will be playing every Wednesday night starting June 11. And then next week, the Chicken Slacks Funky Summer Dance Party. That sounds like a good one to come to. So that'll be next Thursday. And then on the 19th holiday, the Floyd Patterson Band. I expect to be here on that occasion doing the mowing. And Roomful of Blues, July 17. The Love Dogs, July 11, and so forth. Concerts begin at 7, gates open at 6. a barn building on the Fruitlands property. Seems like every building from the 18th and 19th century has to have like an addition attached to it and cavernous depths to it. A view from the red barn of Fruitlands. All downhill from here. Straight ahead is Mount Wachusett, which is I'd say maybe 10 miles away, but it looks like 30 miles from here. And then a valley below us where the Nashua River runs. And somewhere hidden in the trees is Lemonster. And far away, directly ahead, is Mount Monadnock in New Hampshire, a famous site for many people in the 19th, 20th, 21st century for hiking. A reasonable 2 to 3 hour hike. Starting to feel like summer here in Harvard, Massachusetts. It's Paul Medeiros working today at Fruitlands Museum, property stewarded by the trustees of reservations. Beside of the red barn facing the western horizon, an impressively long barn. I'm not sure what was the livestock kept in there. Welcome to the town of Harvard. This is the town hall, it appears. Like the churches, all white. Like a wedding cake. This is the center of Harvard. I used to come up here once on a blue moon from 111 in Boxborough. 111 is a country highway, and lived about 2 miles away. And I would take my bicycle up the hills into Harvard. When I was first introduced to this area of Massachusetts, Boxborough and Harvard, I was told that the landscape was shaped by the glaciers, and Harvard certainly shows that sort of interesting complexity, as white as a wedding cake. Many elaborate historic houses in Harvard, all kinds of artful designs. In Harvard is a famous MIT house designed by a MIT professor in the 20th century, and I've never been to it, but it has numerous windows and an eclectic design. It was built eclectically and bit by bit with all kinds of spare parts. The MIT house somewhere here in Harvard. When I first bicycled up the hill from Boxborough to Harvard, I discovered there were orchards up here. Lots of slopes and hillsides, perfect for orchards. And then a little further I found some nice sort of country stores, and there they sell chocolate, white chocolate. So for me, coming to Harvard meant having some good white chocolate. Little pigs, let me come in. This brick house says 1734, so that's about the probably a founding house in Harvard, because Harvard was founded in 1732. The general store of Harvard, town of. 3-story general store.